NePAAA webinars under the IFPRI ASEAN project. This webinar series is an initial activity of the network, which will be the way forward of the IFPRI ASEAN project beyond its life cycle. There will be more coming up. Therefore, if you are new to our project or this webinar series and be interested in receiving updates on the webinar series, please type your email addresses and we will share the invitation for the next webinar series to your email. Should you be interested in watching the first and second NePAAA webinar organized on the 13th April 2022 this month, they are available on the link that we will share on the chat box later. And my name is Anik Fadila, Policy Facilitator of IFPRI. I will be the moderator of the webinar today. So today we will have Dr. Hiroyuki Takeshima, Senior Research Fellow from IFPRI. He's joining the IFPRI Nigeria office in January 2009 and joined the IFPRI Washington office, the headquarters in 2012. His research has focused on agricultural technology adoption, including varietal technologies and mechanization, farm, non-farm linkages, agricultural transformation and rural economic transformation, public and private investments, agriculture nutrition linkages. His research covers Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. He's also one of the editors of the book, The Nigerian Rice Economy Policy Option for Transforming Production, Marketing, and Trade, which is published in 2016. He is also the 2018 recipient of the Niels Westermark Award of the International Association of Agricultural Economics. Dr. Hiro obtained his PhD in agriculture and consumer economics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA, and he's a citizen of Japan. So Dr. Hiro?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you are still based in Washington, yeah?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so a very good morning, Dr. Hiro.
Yeah,
thank you for agreeing to be here at the very hour. And for participants, we will open a Q&A session after the presentation. So while listening to Dr. Hiro's presentation, I invite you to submit your question and comments in the Q&A box. And we look forward for your active participation throughout the webinar. So now I will invite Dr. Hiroyuki Takeshima to present his study on agricultural transformation, market integration, and smallholders in Southeast Asia, regional overview, and some micro evidence from Vietnam. So you have 30 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Hiro. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important webinar series. So today I would like to present my work on agriculture transformation, market integration, and smallholders in Southeast Asia. And so in this presentation, first, this has two parts. First part will try to review the overall pattern of agricultural modernization, nutrition transition, and natural resource degradation in the region. And then in the second part, we'll go a little bit deeper into a micro level case using the case study from Vietnam. The objectives of this presentation to review the key patterns of agricultural modernization in ASEAN region. This is the first part. as you will see, the overall patterns may be already something you are familiar with, but here we would like to focus more on putting those patterns into a more nationally representative context, and wherever applicable, I will bring in comparison with East and South Asia as well to provide some regional perspectives. And mostly focus on 3 aspects: demand side, economic diversification and nutrition transitions, and supply side, agricultural growth and diversification patterns, and some of the emerging challenges. And then, as I mentioned, the second part will focus on the micro evidence from Vietnam, focusing on evolution of smallholder households, how they are evolving and adjusting to the emerging food market, and in their integration into agri-food market. So let me start by saying that the region, ASEAN region, has been undergoing a significant economic transformation and a structural transformation. And one way to see is, as you all know, the labor has been moving out of the agricultural sector gradually, although the employment share of the agricultural sector is still high. This is the left figure. So since the 1990s, the share of employment share of the agricultural sector has been steadily declining. And where these labors are going, some of the sectors that have particularly important in Southeast Asian region is service sectors, including trade, restaurant, and hotel industries, and government services. These are particularly important. It seems to be more common sector compared to, for example, South Asia. So I thought it was an interesting pattern. Nutrition transition has also been happening. As we all know that calorie consumption has been rising in the last few decades, but there are differences compared to South or East Asia. So, for example, protein consumption in Southeast Asia has been growing faster than South Asia, and increasing share of the protein is coming from fish and seafood commodities. At the same time, compared to South Asia, protein intake from pulse or milk has been much lower, and this is also common in East Asia. Also, vegetable consumption has been rising, but at a much slower pace compared to East Asia. So overall, there has been nutrition transition going on in Southeast Asian region, but at the different trajectory compared to South or East Asia region. Now, one of the important pattern is that the production within the Southeast Asian region continues to be the primary source of meeting the consumption growth in the region. And in one way to see this is the share of net import to domestic consumption has been relatively small. The figure on the left shows compare the value of net import to domestic consumption value of each commodity group. So as you can see, for some of the crops, oil crops, cereals, meat, and vegetables, the dependence on import has been rising, but they still account for only 5% of the domestic consumption. And this Similarly, eggs, fruits, and fish, seafood, the trade quantity is relatively, it's growing, but it's still relatively small to compared to the domestic consumption. So what this means is that the increasing consumption in the region has been largely met by the increasing production within the region. So the production in the region still accounts for a very important role, part of the consumption within the region. Some of the few exceptions are milk, which highly depends on import from outside Southeast Asian region. But yeah, that's one of the exceptions. In the region has also seen increased steady growth in agricultural total factor productivity, and this has been relatively comparable to the rest of Asia Pacific, Latin America, Central America, or other parts of the developing world. However, there has been some decline in productivity growth in countries like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. So there are some concerns. And also, the region has seen a gradual shift from land productivity growth to labor productivity growth. And this trajectory was also observed in more advanced Asian countries like China and Japan or Korea in earlier periods. So Southeast Asia region has been following this trajectory. So yeah, the labor productivity growth has been the increasingly important source of overall productivity growth in agricultural sector. Now, as I mentioned, production in the region, within the region, has been remained the primary source of meeting diverse nutrition demand in the region. So we are seeing the production has also been diversifying within the region, especially diversifying away from cereals toward other commodities. In earlier period, cereals accounted for 40% of total production value in the region, but this has been declining steadily to about 30%. And in the meantime, commodities like meat and vegetable oils, especially palm oils, have been increasing their shares. But the overall patterns are similar to South Asia, but the difference is the commodity makeup. So in South Asia, cereals are also declining, but what is taking over is milk, fruits, and vegetables. So you will see there's some differences with South Asia region. Some of the other interesting emerging pattern is the growing maize-based feed production in Southeast Asia. This is somewhat common across entire Asia. The feed consumption per capita has been rising, and it started rising rapidly in East Asia, but the Southeast Asian countries are rapidly catching up and much faster rate than South Asia. And yeah, as a result, the increasing share of maize produced in the region has been consumed as feed rather than for human consumption. And Southeast Asia, maize followed by rice are increasingly consumed as feed. And this has been partly fueling the growth of livestock and consumption of meat and products. We all know the improved varieties have contributed to the growth. Here, I just wanted to put them in a more in terms of the adoption, the extent of adoption growth of improved varieties. Um, some Southeast Asian countries have started seeing the a rapid expansion of improved varieties in the late 90s. And even in countries like Laos and Cambodia have recently seen the huge expansion of improved varieties since the 2000. And this was the case for rice, and similarly for maize. Hybrid maize adoption rates have been growing. Even in countries like Indonesia and Myanmar, the adoption of hybrid maize has been rising quickly. There have been also improved genetic advancement in other commodities, including genetic improvement in livestock. Some of the examples are pig, genetically improved farmed tilapia. And these have been led by the public sector, but the private sector has also been increasingly involved in breeding, including potato, vegetable seeds, and oil palm. So both public sector and private sector provided other goods and services. The public sector contributed through agriculture R&D, yield enhancing technologies, irrigation infrastructure, road infrastructure. Meanwhile, the private sector have increasingly provided mechanization service, agricultural inputs, some of them including seed production, for example, catfish fingerlings and oil palm planting materials, agrochemicals, and agriculture finance. And there has also been institutional innovations in informal contract rice harvesting, seed corn and seed rice production, broiler and oil palm production, and the vertical integration in catfish sector. So these are some of the interesting aspects of modernization of agricultural sector in Southeast Asia. There are some emerging challenges as well. One of the patterns that will become increasingly important in the future is that the agricultural sector in the region has seen growing shift to more protective policies. And this is in one way indicated by the changes in nominal rate of assistance for agricultural products. The more positive this figure is, the more protective the government is to the sector. So when it was negative, that means the agricultural sector was the source of taxation. And as it becomes more positive, the sector is becoming, shifting from the source of taxation to recipient of subsidies or net support. And as you can see, the Southeast Asian countries have seen the rise in this figure to more positive regions. So what this means is that the government will increasingly require fiscal, financial sources to continue protecting the agricultural sector in the future. The other interesting patterns, which we could call one of the challenge in Asia, Southeast Asia, is the continued smallholder dominance. Despite the fact that the larger farmers are becoming increasingly more efficient, the average land holding size have remained almost flat for the last 50 years or so. And in countries like Philippines, this has actually declined quite substantially. Some of the exceptions is Japan in the recent 15 years or so. But other than these, the smallholders continue to dominate the sector. And there is growing evidence that this dominance of smallholders might be holding back the agricultural sector in the region by missing the opportunity to exploit the economies of scale. So there's growing need for land reform to allow more land transactions from small to large farms. And there are some examples of early land reform in the Philippines, Vietnam, which focused more on supporting smallholders, which turned out to be somewhat unsatisfactory in terms of productivity enhancement. And this is more so because the mechanization is growing faster in the region and raising returns to scale in agriculture. So land reform to allow the exploitation of economies of scale is becoming increasingly important in the region. And at the same time, there is a need for support for some smallholders to successfully leave the agricultural sector. There is also a gradual trend of natural resource degradation. Southeast Asia is relatively rich in forest and water, but they are increasingly degraded. The deforestation has been partly led by oil palm expansion, migration, and weak land tenure. Salinization has been observed in irrigated areas, and other natural resource issues include decline in biodiversity, mangrove deforestation due to aquaculture growth, and water quality deterioration in South China Sea. The growing water demand through competition from hydropower sectors due to rising energy demand. So to summarize the agricultural modernization in Southeast ASEAN region, there has been significant transformation happening with some differences from other Asian regions, for example, South Asia. And the labor movement of from agricultural sector has been somewhat faster than South Asia. And production within the ASEAN region remains the primary source of food and nutrition, despite growing trade with outside regions. Nutrition transitions is particularly growing protein intake from fish, seafood, and less so for vegetables or dairy has been enabled by similar production diversification within the region. And some of the challenges include growing reliance on protective policies, small farm size despite growing mechanization, and natural resource degradation, albeit relatively rich endowments. So that was the overall view of the overall patterns of agricultural modernization in the region. And from here, I would just go through quickly some micro evidence from Vietnam and how smallholder farmers are adjusting through their increased integration with agri-food markets, and what economic factors are driving such changes. The smallholders have been at the center of inclusiveness and rural revitalization. But there has been growing research question of what are the future of smallholders, especially in the face of growing agri-food market. How exactly do smallholders evolve through growing integration with agri-food market, and what may explain such patterns? And there's also interesting gender aspects as well. How the economic roles of household members change across gender as smallholder households become increasingly integrated in the agri-food market. So these are some of the research questions that motivate this study. There has been growing literature on food market integration and smallholders. Then there are various dimensions that have been studied. Some focus on how smallholders participate in the market, and then some others focus on the distinction between net seller and net buyer status of rural smallholders. An important implication was that market consists of small number of large net sellers and many net buyers. And as a result, most smallholders are actually net buyers of food items. There's also been growing literature on how farm and non-farm sector are linked at the regional level and also at the household level. And what are households' decisions to expand into the non-farm sector, but also remain in farming, at least partially? What drives those decisions? And there are also growing literature on production economics, looking at the economies of diversification and specialization at the household level that also have implication of how smallholders respond to growing agri-food market. And there are also Southeast Asia specific literature and of course, rapidly growing literature on gender issues in Vietnam. But there are still knowledge gaps in how smallholders evolve as households and what are the roles of integration with agri-food market. One hypothesis that we attempted to test in this micro study is illustrated in here in this way. So as the food market grow, importantly, smallholders will see increased food purchase from the market rather than food sales from. And this increase in food purchase from the market leads to diversification into both non-farm activities and farming activities. So they will diversify into these into both of these activities while they specialize within each activities. So there are economies of diversification and specialization that coexist at different levels. So this will explain why smallholders keep farming as part of household activities while also expanding into non-farm activities. And that explains why smallholders continue to coexist with a food market transformation. And within this context, female labor market participation into non-farm activities playing an important role. So to test this hypothesis, we use the data, Vietnam Living Standard Surveys. This goes back to 1992 and have been collected at the multiple rounds. These are nationally representative, and at least 1,000 households were appeared 3 times, so consisting of 3 round panels, and about 3,000 households appeared at least twice, making up 2 round panels. So we primarily used these households. So from here, I will quickly go through some descriptive patterns of how, what is happening in Vietnam in the last 2 decades. First, as you can imagine, the declining share of Vietnamese households growing food, selling food, or growing crops and selling crops. Here, the food includes non-crops like livestock or fish. So their shares are somewhat higher, but the patterns are quite similar. So in the late 1990s, 70% of households in the country were growing some type of food, but this has dropped to just above 50% by mid 2010. And the share has been higher in the north than the south, because South is more urbanized, relatively more urbanized, but the pattern are declining patterns are common in both regions. At the same time, where food is produced, households are becoming, smallholder households are becoming increasingly market oriented, meaning that a growing share of what they produce are sold in the market. And so one of the exception is rice in northern Vietnam. This is the dark green color, dark green line in the middle figure. Is about 20% of rice produced by the household in the north were eventually sold in the market, and this has remained fairly flat. So rice in the north has remained fairly subsistence throughout the last few decades, but that is one of the exception. All the other agriculture in general and rice and vegetables in the south and other regions increasingly commercialized, and the same goes for meat and fish aquaculture products. However, there's another twist to this pattern. When smallholders sell commodities in the market, they are increasingly specializing into fewer commodities. So some of the illustration is based on the number of commodities sold by average farm households. Out of 81 commodities listed, for example, in 1998, average farm households sold 4 to 5 commodities. And by 2016, this has dropped to 2 to 3 commodities. So you can see that farm households are more and more specializing within the agricultural sector. Now, the story does not end here. Another important dimension is that the smallholders are increasingly purchasing food from the market. So this is another an important aspect of their interaction with growing agri-food market. So for the whole households in the 1990s, about 70% of food that they consumed were purchased food. So this was already somewhat high, but this has risen to almost 90% by 2016. And even among agricultural households, this has increased from 50% to almost 80%. So you can see that even agricultural households, 80% of food they consumed now come from the purchased food from the agri-food markets. So Vietnamese smallholders are becoming integrated into food value chain in complex ways. There is growing integration more through food purchase rather than food sales. Smallholders have been net buyers of food, and they are further becoming net buyers. On food sales, smallholders are becoming increasingly specialized in fewer crops. At the same time, smallholders are increasingly diversifying into non-farm enterprise and wage earning activities. And this has been led by increased labor use of the household members in non-farm activities especially non-agricultural wage earning labor activities. And this applies to both male and female household members, but the female members relatively more increasingly engaged in non-agricultural wage labor. Another aspect where the gender difference comes in is among smallholder farms. The greater the share of a purchased food, total food, the greater the share of female household labor in non-agricultural sector employment. So what this means is the more the smallholder households start purchasing food from the food markets instead of from their own home production, the more female household members of the household start working in non-agricultural sector. Yeah, so that's this was not clearly observed among male household members. This is only observed among female household members. So those are some of the descriptive results that further motivated the empirical analysis. And this is just revisiting the hypothesis that I showed earlier. And within this context, we were testing economies of diversification and whether economies of specialization exists within each sector, and female labor market participation pattern, and how food market integration affects these three outcomes. In terms of methodologies, I will not go into too much detail here, but we used input distance function and indicator of agri-food market integration, and essentially assessing how increased integration into agri-food market is affecting the estimated economies of scope and economies of specialization parameters. So from here, we just quickly go through the empirical results. We found, as expected, that the integration into food market raised smallholders' economies of diversification between farming and non-farm activities. And the effect of food purchase increase was significant. The effect of food sales was not significant, but the proximity to market was also significant. So what this means is, what was the economies of diversification? This was the greater overall incomes realized from engaging in both farming and non-farm activities rather than specializing into only one of them. So this was the economies of diversification. And what we are finding here is that integration into food market, especially through increased food purchase, further strengthened this economies of diversification for smallholders. And also, as we expected, integration with food market encourages smallholder households' female members to participate in non-farm sector, particularly wage earning activities. And this was especially pronounced in northern Vietnam. But this was not clearly observed among male household members. So to conclude, smallholders are increasingly integrated into food market through food purchase, more so than through food sales. Food market integration benefits smallholders just as it benefits non-farm households, because as a source of cheaper and more diverse source of food, and helping female members to participate in non-farm labor market more actively. But smallholders, many of them remain in farming also because food market integration also raise economies of diversification instead of specializing entirely in non-farm sector. So they neither expand nor leave their farming activities. And within farming activities, they tend to specialize into fewer commodities, but greater production scale. And the process also involves the specialization of occupation of each member within the smallholder households. On average, female members specialize more into non-farm wage income earning activities, but in smallholder households, if the households continue some farming activities, some women in the household also specialize in farming. So you'll see, some women specializing into non-farm activities, while other female member specializing in farming activities. So what are the policy implications? First, it is important to look smallholders as households and not only as producers. For food production, integration process into agri-food market is somewhat mixed. But for food consumption, the pattern is clear. There is growing integration with agri-food markets. And for supporting smallholder households, a commodity-based value chain approach should use a bundle of commodities for multiple smallholder households and allows each smallholders to specialize in different set of crops. And for supporting women in smallholder households, it is important to identify which female members may specialize in farming and who will specialize in non-farm activities, because that would affect for example, the effectiveness of training intervention. But there are also further questions. For example, we did not look at the economic significance of non-farm wage earning activities. So that's one area to further explore. There is also a question of what roles the public investments play, R&D, infrastructure, and regulation. And the findings so far are in the medium to short term, but there are also effects that emerge in the long run. And what are the process of such smallholder transition and evolution in the long run is another area of future research. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to receiving comments and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hiro. Now I'm opening the Q&A session. So I invite everyone who would like to ask questions or make comments to Dr. Hiro's presentation. You may raise your hand using the features on the bottom of your Zoom window, and I will unmute you, or you can type on the Q&A box. Okay, let me see if there's a hand. Okay, while we are waiting for a question from audience, I have question from for Dr. Hiro. So in your study, it was in your presentation, it was mentioned that domestic consumption and nutrition demand still being supplied by the domestic production. And I think in ASEAN and also in the world, there's a problem that there's a low youth involvement in agriculture sector. So do you have any view on this or do you have any information on how this youth involvement should be included in the agriculture value chains? Thank you.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. This issue of the dominance of domestic production is something that we will continue to recognize as the um, the the global trade of food commodities gradually expands. So yeah, first of all, I think it does not mean that the trade in regional trade is not important. It's trade is also growing, and where there is a scope for exploiting the comparative advantage, a trade should definitely play a major roles. But it seems even in other countries, many Asian countries, much of the food consumption is provided by the production in their own countries. And China, for example, India, and this might have to do with a lot of factors, like some of them are, preference, heterogeneity, that even though the comparative advantage might grow for some commodities, it might still be difficult for, for example, other countries to produce the exact type of food preferred in the other countries. So that kind of comparative advantage, home comparative advantage may persist for some time. So I think it is wise to explore, both opportunities in one way. One aspect through increased trade with other countries, but also continuing public investments and in the agricultural and then food production within their own countries and region. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned in your presentation that what is it? There's a decline trend of the agriculture and if we see in the ASEAN, agriculture is still the main three main sector in ASEAN, and while if we see the dominant in the agriculture sector of the smallholders, it's only Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar still dominated by the agriculture activity. Do you have any information or view on what make these key determinants of these trends? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I think yeah, the declining declining share of employment share of agricultural sector is a common patterns observed across the world, around the world. So just like everywhere else, I think the driving factor is increased, relative increase in labor productivity in non-agricultural sector, and growing, substitution with capital that's happening in the agricultural sector. So I think, yeah, the wage, for example, is rising much, faster in service industries or manufacturing industries, and this is not any different, from other regions in the world. But I think one important pattern seems to be that at the individual level, we are seeing, increasing shift from agriculture to non-agricultural sector. But at the household level, many households continue involved in the farming activities, meaning that at least one member of the households continue engaging in farming activities, and this pattern seems to have been one of the driving factor of why smallholders continue to persist in the agricultural sector instead of them entirely, specializing into non-agricultural sector. So yeah, that's yeah. I mean, this has been a pattern not only in ASEAN region, but also in South Asia and even in East Asia. And so it will be interesting to see in further down the line how these patterns will eventually change, or whether this pattern will hold for some time, and what that would imply to the overall agricultural productivity growth in the region.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned about specialization also in farming in Vietnam, and we aware that I think Vietnam now known as the rising star in ASEAN in agriculture sector. Do you think it's also have some relation to the specialization, farm specialization?
Yes. I think yes, yes, that's definitely true. Yes, we saw even at the household level, on average, smallholders, not only the large commercial farmers, but even the average smallholders seems to be specializing into fewer commodities, and I think at the country level, I think yeah, the Vietnam's status is probably led by large commercial agribusiness, like coffee exports, and some big rice exporters, but we see that even at the smallholders level, yeah, this specialization within the agricultural sector seems to be happening broadly, quite extensively. And I think mechanization is one factor that is pretty much raising the returns to scale for each commodities. So, and that's really changing, the structure of comparative advantage even at the household level. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Hiro. I think we exceeding the time for Q&A. It's very interesting. So I would like to thank everyone, participants. I see many familiar names attending the webinar today. And if you, moment, let me, okay, so we will have another next webinar, NePAAA webinar, which will be organized on 19 May 2022. So if you would like to have the further information, you can register to the NePAAA newsletter for updates. And I would like to thank everyone again for Dr. Hiro as speaker and all participants for today for being with us. Thank you so much, and see you in the next NePAAA webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hiro.